Hi, my name's Hadrian, and last month my family hosted a funeral for me while I was still alive. They sent out invitations, wore black, gave speeches about the son who chose ambition over love. They cried, not because I died, but because I refused to disappear. They took me out of the trust, cropped me out of the photos, told the world I lost my way, while they were stealing mine. But here's what haunts me most. What kind of family buries the truth and calls it closure? There are emails you never forget, not because of what they say, but what they don't. That morning, I opened my inbox out of habit while sipping lukewarm coffee in Chambers. The sender was unfamiliar, just a string of numbers and letters, like a burner account. Attached was a single link, no subject, no greeting. I almost deleted it, but something about it made me pause. The preview text read, "In loving memory of," followed by my full name. Luca Thorne, born 1984. Died. Last week? My breath caught. I clicked. It led to the website of a small church back in Ashford County, Georgia, where I grew up. My photo, grainy and 10 years outdated, topped the page like a final insult. Underneath, Luca was known for his sharp mind, his distance from home, and his choices we tried hard to understand. Tried hard to understand. My hands trembled. I reread every word, clinging to some mistake. Maybe another Luca Thorne, a cousin, a glitch. But there it was. My birth date, my high school, the scholarship that took me north. There was no denying it. They'd buried me. Not in flesh, but in family. I grabbed my phone, dialing the landline at my parents' house. 3 rings, then voicemail, my father's voice, slow and heavy with age, telling callers to leave a message. I hung up and called again. Still nothing. Next, I texted Leander, my oldest brother, the golden one. "Call me, now." He replied 2 minutes later. "Just one line. Guess you're finally gone." Gone. I stared at the screen. Then, out of a mix of spite and disbelief, I checked the website of the Thorne Family Foundation. My mother updated it religiously with family accomplishments, donations, photo albums. We used to joke it was her 3rd child. There were photos of last month's gala, smiling cousins, speeches, my brother holding court like a senator. But not me. I searched the Our Family Legacy section. My name used to sit neatly between Leander's and Elise's. Now it jumped from Elise to a blank space, a vanished node. I wasn't just excluded, I'd been deleted. It didn't make sense. Or maybe, deep down, it did. I thought back to the Christmas Eve 5 years ago. We'd been in the formal dining room, Leander going on about a land deal. I'd glanced at the foundation's annual report, casually at first, then asked why a 6-figure donation to a community program never reached the recipient. Silence. My father set his glass down. My mother smiled tightly. Leander told me to mind my own court. We finished the meal. I flew home the next day. I was never invited back. But I didn't think they'd go this far. Later that evening, I sat in my living room with every light off. My law books surrounded me, unopened. On impulse, I opened Facebook, something I rarely did. I searched my sister's profile, scrolled through albums, family BBQs, birthdays, weddings. I was in none of them. Or worse, cropped out. One photo stopped me cold. It was a group shot at our cousin's engagement party. I remembered standing to the left of Elise in that photo. But now, it was just her and her fiancé, smiling like I'd never existed. The erasure had been happening for years. I just hadn't noticed. Not until now. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Personal. Inside were copies of my birth certificate, an old trust deed from my grandfather, and the original will he wrote before dying. My name was there, in black and white. They couldn't erase that. In my office, I sat for hours, sifting through affidavits I'd written for other people's families. Estranged siblings, inheritance battles, secrets buried deeper than coffins. Never thought I'd be one of them. On my desk was a flash drive I hadn't touched in years. I plugged it in. One audio file, labeled Dad, July 2021. His voice cracked through my speakers. "You're still my boy. No matter what they say, you'll always be my Luca." He never called again. And neither did I. At 2:07 a.m., I opened a browser and booked a one-way ticket to Georgia. No suitcase, just my judge's robes. Kansas City at night didn't feel like home. It felt like a replica of a memory. Familiar buildings in slightly the wrong shades, streets that knew me but didn't nod back. As I drove past my old elementary school, I caught a glimpse of the rusty monkey bars I'd once broken my arm on. The bakery down the street still had the same red awning, though it sagged now, like even the city had grown tired of pretending. I pulled up 2 blocks away from the estate. I didn't want them to see me yet, if they even still remembered what I looked like. The colonial facade of my parents' house rose like a judge's bench before me, symmetrical, stately, and cold. American flags lined the path, and expensive flower arrangements flanked the wrought iron gate. My name wasn't on any of the cards. From the tinted window of my rental, I watched them arrive. Familiar silhouettes, black coats brushing against each other like waves lapping at a shore I was no longer allowed to dock. There was Leander, shaking hands like a senator, with that patented smirk that always meant he was winning. His wife clung to his arm like she'd married into royalty. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years pointed at the house, whispered something to her husband, and laughed. I couldn't hear it, but I felt it in my gut. That kind of laughter always had a name attached. I waited until the last of the mourners had drifted inside before slipping around to the side entrance. The scent of lavender and wood polish hit me the moment I stepped into the corridor. A wave of nausea followed. This house still smelled like my mother's disapproval. Through the half-opened door to the main living room, I could hear voices. A woman, steady, cool, rehearsed, was speaking. "He lost his way," she said. And though it broke our hearts, we had to let go. You can't help someone who doesn't want to be found. It was my mother, delivering a eulogy for her very much alive son. I stood frozen, hidden behind a tall floral arrangement. A projector hummed softly as it cast images on the wall. Childhood birthday parties, vacations, first days of school. My face appeared a few times, mostly as a child, usually in a corner. Then, by the time the slideshow reached the years I had started law school, I disappeared entirely. It wasn't just my death they were announcing. They were erasing my life in stages. When the eulogy ended, light conversation resumed. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly. I slipped through the hallway, avoiding eye contact, and found myself in the foyer. That's where it hit hardest. Mounted on an easel was a giant canvas, the Davidson family tree. Ornate calligraphy, gold leaf framing. At the base were my parents' names. Branches extended with Leander's name at the top, followed by his children, even their pets. My name was gone, not scratched out, not faded. Just never there. Like I'd never been born. I had prosecuted forgers, fraudsters, men who had embezzled billions. But nothing felt as criminal as being deleted like this. I didn't break down. Not then. Judges don't cry in public, at least not good ones. I found the powder room, locked the door, and leaned against the sink. Breathing into the crook of my elbow, I let the tremor pass. Then I heard a floorboard creak behind me. No, not in the bathroom. Outside, down the hall. I cracked the door just enough to see into the kitchen. Aunt Corinne, my godmother, stood there, a glass of water in hand. She looked older, smaller, but her eyes were just as sharp. We locked eyes for a full 5 seconds. She didn't gasp, didn't call out, just nodded. Once, slowly. I didn't know if it meant she was sorry or complicit. I slipped out through the laundry room and back into the night. In the silence of my car, I whispered it to myself, like a verdict being read aloud. You buried me while I was breathing. Let's see what rises from the grave. I didn't drive far after leaving the house, just enough to get out of the neighborhood, away from the smell of lilies and white lies. I ended up in front of what used to be Oak Ridge Plaza, a strip mall now mostly deserted. I parked and stepped out, hands in my coat pockets. The wind had picked up. Missourian spring never made up its mind. Warm 1 minute, sharp enough to bite the next. I walked past the darkened windows of the old bookstore. That corner of the lot, right there, is where my dad taught me to drive. I must have hit the brake too hard that afternoon because he laughed and said, "If I didn't know any better, I'd say you were trying to eject me from the passenger seat." His voice carried that joking thunder he used to have, the kind that made you want to do right by him. I stayed in that memory longer than I should have. It was warmer than the present. My shoes scraped the concrete as I moved past the dry cleaners. Long shut down. I stood still in front of where the bakery used to be. Every Friday my mom took me there for lemon bars. She always ordered first, like clockwork, and I'd imitate her exactly. 2 lemon bars and a chocolate milk, please. Back then, I mattered. Now, they couldn't even be bothered to send me an actual obituary, just a link, a silent declaration. You are no longer one of us. The glow from a cheap motel sign across the street reminded me how far from home I really was, even standing on its soil. Eventually, I turned and walked back to the car. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just felt hollow. A kind of quiet that didn't echo, didn't vibrate. It just existed. At the hotel, the carpet reeked faintly of mildew. I slid the keycard in, tossed my coat onto the chair, and sat on the edge of the bed. I had told myself I'd sleep, but that was a lie I didn't believe either. Instead, I opened my laptop. A notification blinked. Encrypted message, no sender name. I hovered before clicking. Then I read. A scanned document, official watermark still visible. The family trust, amended. 2 years ago. I read every line, slowly, thoroughly, and then I read it again. My name, Judge Hadrian Caleb Reese, was no longer on it. No allocations, no mentions, no to be held in trust for. It was like I never existed. Leander was listed as sole beneficiary. The wording was precise. As the only direct descendant recognized under the current terms of this trust. They had rewritten not just the document, but the bloodline. I didn't breathe for a long time. My chest didn't rise. My fingers didn't twitch. I sat there like a man carved out of stone, staring at the betrayal etched in legal language I helped write. 2 years ago. That's when Mom stopped answering calls completely, when Dad's emails grew shorter, when Leander started showing up in magazines and panels and began wearing our father's cufflinks on air. I had chalked it up to family drift, careless, painful, but survivable. Now it looked a lot more like premeditation. I opened another browser tab and typed in Leander's name. His professional site popped up, sleek and self-congratulatory. There was a new tab I hadn't seen before. Media. Curiosity? No. It was compulsion. Click. The page featured a podcast called Legacy Matters, a sleek black and gold logo and the smug headshots of Leander and a co-host I didn't recognize. The latest episode was titled Ghosts That Haunt Us and Why We're Better Without Them. I played it. We all have that one family member, Leander began, his voice syrupy smooth. You know, the one who gets lost in their own righteousness. I froze. He laughed softly. Mine was obsessed with law. Not justice, mind you, law. Letters and loopholes. Until one day, he forgot how to be human. The co-host cackled. Sounds like he got what was coming to him. Oh, we gave him a proper send-off, Leander added. Held a funeral and everything. Though, funnily enough, he didn't show. They both laughed. Hard. I paused the playback. The room went silent again, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of fury in my chest. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly. They had turned my erasure into a punchline. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat. You don't realize how much a name holds until it's missing. And when that name is yours, suddenly, the world starts slipping. I closed the browser and reached into my suitcase for the portable printer I packed out of habit. Old reflexes from courthouse travel days. I plugged it in, pulled up the trust document, and printed all 27 pages. The amended section was on page 18. Everything before that still had my fingerprints, phrases I had written, legal clauses I had once explained to my parents late into the night at the kitchen table. My words were still there, but my name wasn't. And there, in small, neat font, was the new clause. The surviving assets shall be divided equally among the remaining bloodline heirs, excluding any estranged members deemed legally or relationally unfit. That last phrase? It wasn't legal language. It was personal venom, and it didn't sound like my father. I highlighted the clause, stared at it, and said aloud to no one, "They forgot I wrote the original." The printer still hummed softly. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used since I left the probate division. A voice answered on the third ring. Clara Benedetti speaking. "It's Judge Hadrian. I'd like to reopen a trust evaluation." She paused. "Is this about the Delacroix Foundation?" "Exactly that." Another pause, then a quiet breath on her end. "Tell me what they did." I looked at the glowing screen again. The trust. The podcast still paused mid-laughter. The name that used to be mine, now a gap in ink. "They buried me," I said. "I'm just digging back up." My phone hadn't buzzed in hours, not since I left the driveway before sunrise. It didn't matter. I wasn't expecting anything. But old habits die slow, and my thumb still swiped down on the home screen, checking for messages I knew wouldn't come. Holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. Nothing from them in years. But today? Today hit different. Somewhere between Kansas City's downtown lights and the silence of the motel room I'd crashed in, I opened my Photos app and tapped through the few group shots I still had saved from before. Then muscle memory took over. I scrolled into my old family group chat. Dead. No new messages for years. Then I noticed something. Leander had renamed the group, removed the photo. Just Mom, a few cousins, and one aunt remained. My name? Erased. A different group popped up under Family Core. I tapped it. My stomach turned. Photos of the living room. Black drapes, tables set up with floral arrangements, slideshow projections, all from the funeral I never died in. A thread from 2 weeks ago. "Let's keep this one peaceful. No Hadrian drama this time." The words didn't sting. They gutted. I clicked on an attached video. My mother stood at the center of it all, draped in charcoal gray, her voice floating out smooth and practiced. "We've weathered a storm. Our family's foundation was shaken, by ambition, by choices that left scars. But through it all, we found resilience." Applause. She clasped Leander's hand next to her. "This man, my son, picked up the pieces of this family." I paused the video. I had no idea what part of me died in their heads, but it was clear she wrote the obituary long before they printed it. I rewound to catch her last sentence again. Some losses, though painful, are necessary. I sat with that sentence like it was a closing argument, and I wasn't the one making it. Later that night, I parked 2 blocks down from the house I once called home. The key still worked. No one changed the locks. Maybe they didn't think they had to. After all, in their minds, I wasn't walking this earth anymore. It was empty, dark, still smelled of lemon floor wax and lavender sachets. Mom's favorite. I wandered into the hallway, where the family portraits lined the walls like court exhibits. One of them caught my eye. It was the Christmas photo, taken before the brunch where I was seated by the kitchen. I remembered wearing a burgundy tie, standing on the far right. Now, I wasn't in the frame at all. The cut was sloppy, too sharp on one edge. I stepped closer. You could still see the hem of my jacket sleeve. Cropped, like I'd been erased by someone in a rush, or someone who didn't care if the evidence showed. I stood in front of it for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I let the silence fill the space they'd carved out of me. Then I walked into the kitchen, pulled a notepad from the drawer by the fridge, and wrote one sentence. If you're going to erase me, make sure the ink doesn't run. I folded the note, placed it next to the coffee pot, and left. Back at the motel, I didn't bother changing out of my suit. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the law firm we'd used for the family trust. The website hadn't changed in years. I typed a short, direct email, requesting access to all amendment records made to the Hadrian Family Trust within the past 36 months. Please send PDFs of all signatory pages. As an original co-drafter, I have legal standing. I CC'd my assistant back at court and attached a rough clause violation brief I'd drafted earlier that day. I signed it. Judge Hadrian M. Hadrian. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. Then I clicked send. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was bleeding into a soft gray when I packed up. I didn't look back at the motel, just drove. Headlights sweeping across the road ahead like the truth I was finally ready to shine. They think silence is safety, but silence is where I sharpen the blade. The smell of overripe strawberries and warm cinnamon rolls greeted me as I stepped onto the patio where brunch was set. A long table dressed in floral linen sat under the pergola, casting soft shadows over a dozen carefully plated breakfasts. It all looked curated, more for appearances than appetite. A Sunday meal meant to distract, not reconnect. Leander was already in full performance mode, shaking hands, grinning wide, clinking glasses of fresh orange juice with distant relatives. I spotted my mother seated at the head, flanked by the family's old accountant and Pastor Rick, the man who used to lead prayer at our Thanksgiving dinners. Their presence told me exactly what this was. Not a family meal. A PR moment. A containment attempt. I took my seat at the far end. No one acknowledged me directly, except for a tight nod from my cousin Joanna, which I returned without warmth. Then came the moment Leander loved most, when everyone was forced to listen. I just want to take a second, he began, holding up his mimosa, to honor someone who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure the family foundation stayed strong through our toughest transitions. He paused for effect, letting the silence hang like a portrait in a hallway. My late sister, Eleanor. My breath hitched. She laid the groundwork for the new grant structures, the legal filings, the endowment structure redesign, the compliance audits. We owe that clarity to her. Applause erupted. My mother dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. Across the table, a few relatives clinked forks against glasses in faux celebration. Not one word of that work was hers. Every file he mentioned, I had drawn up. Every form, filed, I had reviewed, signed, and delivered. And yet, as the room filled with the sound of validation, I sat there, silent. For now. When the clapping died, I stood up slowly. My chair scraped the ground. Not loud, but enough to pull a few eyes toward me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't clear my throat. I just smiled and said, "Thank you, Leander." He blinked, unsure of the direction I was heading. "Just one note of correction," I continued. "Eleanor never handled the legal filings. She was in Florida that entire summer dealing with Dad's estate delay. The grant restructuring was logged under my account with Miller and Gray, and the compliance audits were actually pushed through by my office after your signatures bounced for 6 weeks." I scanned the table. "So, while I appreciate the rewrite, let's not confuse memory with fiction." Mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Joanna's fork paused mid-air. I leaned slightly forward. "Erase me from your stories," I said, my voice like cooled iron. "But don't steal my chapters." The silence was heavier than any toast. Leander forced a laugh. "Come on, Hadrian. You're taking this too seriously." I reached into my coat and placed a thick envelope on the table. "This," I said, "is a formal notice of review. It concerns the recent amendments to the family trust. You have 10 business days to respond before I move forward with public action, including a fraud claim regarding misattributed consent signatures." I turned to my mother, not blinking. "You can continue pretending I'm dead," I said, "or you can try to survive this alive." The moment stretched long. No one moved. Then I adjusted my blazer, took a final sip of untouched coffee, and walked out. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't need to. I drove toward the edge of town where the strip mall used to house a Radio Shack and a donut shop that always got my name wrong on the receipt. Now, the lot was half empty, and all the signage faded from sun and wind. I pulled in and killed the engine. The memory came back sharp. I was 10, holding the wheel with both hands, Dad beside me saying, "You don't get to eat at this table if you don't follow the rules." His voice was firm, final, and I had believed him. Now, I thought, I bring my own table, and I serve facts. By the time I reached my office downtown, dusk had painted the windows bronze. The building was mostly empty, only the faint hum of the cleaning crew somewhere down the hall. I dialed Chloe, my paralegal. "Go ahead," I said. "File the injunction. Freeze the trust assets until full review. Use the binder labeled Crimson and send a copy to Sandra. We'll want her looped in." As I hung up, I opened a blank email to an old contact. Subject: Coffee? Judge Marla, hope you're well. Would love a quiet conversation about a trust dispute. Informal, off the record if possible. My treat. I hovered over send, rereading once. Then I clicked. Leaning back in my chair, I exhaled and whispered, "You win in silence, but now, it's time they hear me." I sat behind my desk when the calendar notification blinked onto the screen. Foundation Board meeting, 9 a.m. Then a second alert followed. Removed. My title disappeared as cleanly as chalk wiped from a slate. Leander had pulled the meeting forward, rerouted the invite. No me. The Foundation's legal counsel, years on the board, confirmed it was no mistake. They deliberately erased me. In that moment, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was wiping me from the ledger. I closed my laptop and stared out the window, watching cars pass the courthouse below. I'd always known they'd try to bury me, but never with official paperwork. Later that morning, my phone buzzed. A reporter's voicemail. "Judge Hadrian, can you comment on reports of ethical questions arising from the Foundation's practices?" The message replayed in my head as I browsed the online article. Headline: Judge Under, Fire for Foundation Legal Gray Zones. Leander's maneuver had morphed into allegations of misconduct. and the base was my reputation. My jaw clenched. How many times had mothers whispered, "You shut up and go along, or you'll regret it"? Now it was Leander's turn to learn that truth can bite. By midday, I summoned my assistant, Claire. "Pull every internal email from my account going back 6 months. Cross-check with server logs." She nodded, pale. A forensic specialist arrived that afternoon. My office, once silent and warm, felt small, conjuring memories of childhood kitchens where whispered warnings hung like drafts. Before dinner, I typed and sent a letter to the state bar, requesting an ethics inquiry on myself. I wasn't arrogant. I was calculating. If someone accused me privately, fine, make it official. Let them rummage through every file while I stood transparent. It was a move that felt like wrestling with a serpent. Dangerous, but necessary. My mother called the next evening, her voice shaky. "Son, please, for the family's sake, just withdraw quietly." No remainder of her earlier kisses or bedtime prayers lingered in that syllable. I spoke evenly. "I'll make sure the truth has your last name on it." She hung up before I could add another word. I traced my finger around the rim of my coffee cup, tasting bitterness I didn't remember ordering. The next morning, I met with Alex, a media consultant and old friend. His office smelled of roasted coffee and faded leather chairs. He stared when I walked in. "They're spinning this fast. You need one line, something that gets you back in control." I leaned forward. "I built it. I won't burn it. But I won't let them steal it." Alex nodded steadily. That would be our mantra. We finalized plans for a press appearance 7 days out, less than a week to shift the narrative. I emailed Claire to schedule a conference with the state bar and the foundation's council. Then I paused. My reflection on the glossy plaque across from my desk read back at me. Judge Hadrian, father, son, lawyer. Now, disinherited, maligned, uninvited. I closed the blinds. The city streetlights cast rectangles across the floor, spelling shadowed bars. In 6 days, I'd step onto a stage and speak not just as a judge or as a betrayed son, but as the man Leander thought he could erase. I'd give them pause, I'd give them clarity, and I wouldn't let them steal it. I awoke before dawn to the buzz of my phone lightening into life, an email from an unknown sender. I opened it, expecting ambivalence. Instead, I found my own legal strategy thread, forwarded and edited to paint me as scheming and biased. It was as though someone had taken our blueprint for legitimacy and twisted it into a confession. My pulse raced. Local bar associations were already opening informal reviews, and the morning news dotted the headlines with whispers of collusion. I summoned Claire. "They've leaked our internal notes," I said, scanning her face for response. She didn't blink. "Who?" I asked. "Unknown." The rot had spread from boardroom to click. I realized Leander had weaponized every email, every timestamp. They were trying to frame me as both unstable and unethical. 11 that same morning, I received another package. A delicate ivory envelope with my name in Mother's familiar looping script. Inside, a handwritten appeal. "Why must truth be your weapon, and suffering our punishment?" The words were deceptively lyrical, but loaded with guilt. Almost like a prayer. Yet the irony struck me cold. Within the hour, my daughter's Instagram alerted me. It had been shared with a caption, "Still praying for my wayward son." My personal grief was now their public spectacle. I closed the letter and stepped into my late-model sedan. In the quiet hum of the engine, I felt the weight of betrayal settle deeper. My mother's manipulation angered me, but didn't surprise me. I was no longer her judge. I was her test. Later that afternoon, my old college roommate, I'll call him Greg, called in a hushed tone. He'd become a private investigator. He'd uncovered a time-stamped trail in the foundation's accounting logs, a large transfer right before the leak hit the press. Funds moved, missing records, and each timestamp corresponded to moments when I'd last accessed my account. The pieces clicked. Laban orchestrated the leak to coincide with that transfer to discredit me publicly. An ice-cold resolve formed. They weren't just erasing me, they were weaponizing my silence. By pretending I was guilty, they'd tied my hands, shredded my credibility, and corrupted my name. Across the light haze of dusk, I sat back at my desk and drafted a cease and desist to the foundation and their PR council. I wrote it flatly and firmly. Retract the allegations, return my access, or face legal consequences. I then filed a preliminary motion for an injunction to freeze all foundation disbursements until the lawsuit resolved. It wasn't revenge. It was containment, clarity, the reclaiming of truth. In the quiet evenings, I found myself running lines for the press appearance still scheduled. The room empties, and the echo of my own voice fills the walls. Am I out for revenge? No. I'm out for recognition and respect. I said it 3 times. Each time it felt more like affirmation than rehearsing. When the clock finally read close to midnight, I logged off and pulled the blackout shades. My reflection stared back. Sharp, worn, but not broken. The line between shadow and light perched just behind my eyes. I thought of Leander and Mom, waiting in their controlled sanctuaries, believing they had buried me. But every strategy has a weakness. Their plan had just become mine to outflank. And I was ready. The envelope was heavy, not in weight, but in implication. Cream-colored, embossed, sealed with wax like something from another century. I opened it slowly, unsure whether to laugh or tremble. Inside was a funeral invitation. Mine. Ornate black font read, "In loving memory of Hadrian Morrow, son lost not to death, but to disgrace." The service was scheduled for this Sunday, at the same church where I was baptized, confirmed, and once believed family meant forever. They had sent it like a dare, like a final stamp on their story. But if they were going to make it public, so would I. I didn't arrive in a car. I arrived with a purpose. My judge's robe draped across my shoulders, I walked up the church steps with a quiet police escort. Not for drama, but for decorum. This wasn't a protest. This was an appearance. Every camera outside clicked in sequence, like a symphony of surprise. Inside, the organ played softly. People dressed in black filled the pews. Some faces I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, old school teachers, community board members. Leander stood at the altar, solemn, hands folded like he was mourning someone real. When I entered, a collective gasp echoed. Heads turned. Some rose. My mother didn't even look up. I walked slowly, letting the weight of every stare land where it may. At the front was the casket, closed, draped in navy silk, a wreath perched above. I stepped forward and opened it. Inside, a mirror. So I stood, looking down at myself, and I smiled. "Clever," I whispered. Then I turned to the back of the room and raised one finger. The technician I'd hired nodded and pressed play. The projector screen behind the altar lit up. First, an audio clip, static, then a woman's voice. They forged the documents. He never knew. They wanted him gone. That's all. It was Leander's ex-wife, anonymous but unmistakable. Her confession, recorded with consent, edited only to protect identity. As her words continued, emails flashed on screen, timestamps, digital signatures, and scanned copies of amendments I had never signed. Then bank logs, transfers tied to foundation funds, dates lining up with my supposed removal and the sudden influx of cash into Leander's campaign fund. Whispers started in the second pew. By the 4th minute, The whispers had turned into murmurs. Someone near the aisle stood and walked out. A church elder. Another followed. One woman took off her heels and hurled them at the family banner behind the pulpit, hitting it with a loud thud. No one stopped her. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The footage ended on a single still. Me, 10 years ago, at the original foundation launch, cutting the ribbon beside my father. The caption below read, "Built by Hadrian Morrow." My mother swayed slightly, her hand clutching Leander's, her face blank. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Leander reached for the mic, but no sound came. Just silence. And recording phones. I bowed slightly, not mockingly, not in pride, just acknowledgement. Then I turned, walked down the aisle, and out into the sun. Outside, a child looked up at his mother. "But he's not dead, right?" She knelt beside him. "No, baby. Some people just want to bury the ones who tell the truth, the morning after the church." The silence should have been a relief. But my phone disagreed. It lit up with a vengeance. Missed calls, voicemails, news pings. The video had gone viral, not just local viral, national. Judge crashes his own funeral, exposes family fraud, was plastered across headlines. I didn't even open most of them. Just watched the caller IDs roll. Partners from my father's law firm, family friends I hadn't heard from in a decade, and one from a woman I didn't recognize, likely a reporter hoping to taste blood. By noon, the firm my father spent 30 years building was under scrutiny. Clients began pulling out. One left a voicemail. "We believe in integrity. Sadly, the Morrow name no longer carries it." I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I just sat at the edge of my bed, fully dressed, staring at a wall like it could answer the question pounding in my head. What now? I made coffee I didn't drink, and turned on the news I didn't want to hear. But there I was, again on every screen, still in my judge's robe, walking down that church aisle like a ghost come to reclaim his name. Body language analysts were pointing out the stiffness in Leander's jaw, the way my mother's hands trembled during the confession clip. Then came the panel shows, talking heads dissecting the meaning of silence. Hadrian Morrow didn't say a word, and yet somehow he said everything. Some online sleuth found old public records, real estate transfers, trust amendments, donor fund movements. They painted a damning picture. Every dotted line pointed back to Leander. They didn't need me to narrate it. The facts did that just fine. By late afternoon, I drove past the estate. Once a palace of pride, now it sat hollow and humbled. The security gates were ajar. No groundskeepers, no black SUVs, just stillness. Even the air around it felt abandoned. A for sale sign leaned against the mailbox, as if the house itself wanted out. I parked across the street, engine running, and watched. On the porch sat my father. Not in his crisp suit or polished shoes. Just an old cardigan, slouched shoulders, and a face that had forgotten how to hold dignity. He stared into the middle distance like he was waiting for someone who'd never come. I didn't get out. He didn't wave. We were just two statues, carved from different regrets. I reached into the passenger seat and pulled out the photo, one of the last we ever took together. A fishing trip in late spring. I was 17, awkward, proud, holding up a bass like it was a trophy from Olympus. He stood beside me, hand on my shoulder, sunburned and smiling. Back then, we still belonged to the same story. I didn't write a note. Didn't need to. I slid it into the mailbox and drove away. Hours later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I opened it. It was a photo of the same picture. Burning. The edges curling into black, the center swallowed in flame. No words, no signature. Just smoke and silence. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not out of shock. I suppose I'd expected it. But part of me, some lingering boyish filament, still hoped he'd look at that photo and remember who we were before we started lying to ourselves. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. By the next morning, Leander's publicist was all over the networks, trying to claw the narrative back into their grip. He orchestrated a media stunt, she claimed, an ambush designed to humiliate a grieving family. But the tide had turned. People weren't buying it. They'd watched the video, watched the silence. They saw who reached for control and who simply stood in truth. I had done nothing but show up. That was the thing about letting them bury me. They built the funeral. They dug the hole. They invited the crowd. All I did was step into the light. And now the world was beginning to see, not just who got buried, but who picked up the shovel when I received the call that the IRS had launched a formal audit into the family foundation. I was sitting behind my desk, reviewing court files. It felt like the quiet before a storm. Paperwork and silence. But beneath, a current building toward vindication. The auditor's voice was calm, almost clinical. We've uncovered discrepancies in past filings, related to Percival and Leander. My name never appeared in those documents. That absence, once meant to erase me, now underscored how deep the distortion ran. A few days later, a courier delivered a letter, handwritten on soft pastel stationery. It wasn't signed by Mom, but by someone who called herself Angela RN, Sunnyside Hospice. They had kept correspondence. The letter revealed Mom had confronted Leander about hiding me from every family record and interest. She asked, begged that her youngest son be heard, that I be included in decisions. Leander stopped her. Her final written words, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect him." I folded the letter slowly, each crease mirrored in my chest. That afternoon, I drove to her gravesite, sunlight muted by spring clouds. I stood before her headstone, pressed the nurse's envelope into the damp grass, and whispered, "I got your message, Mom." Tears came, not of anger, but of release. The weight I'd carried lifted and floated away with the breeze. Back in my chambers, court documents piled on my desk. Within hours, federal agents arrived. Quiet, professional. They spoke with former foundation staff, subpoenaed files. In less than a week, Leander received a notice to appear before the IRS, accompanied by a company raid. Newspaper headlines shifted. Gone were the stories of scandalous drama. Now came talk of embezzlement and fraud. Clients who once fled legal representation under his family's name now paused. My father's law practice, once powered by legacy, wavered under the glare of auditors. Still, I returned to my courtroom routines, donning my robe each morning with renewed purpose. Then, my former mentor and friend, Judge Palmer, walked into my office during recess and handed me a small wooden gavel, smooth and warm. "Some justice is served in court," he said, "but some by surviving." I placed it next to my folded robe from the funeral, the robe I wore when I reclaimed my name in public. It rested there like a silent oath. There's something powerful in quiet resilience. Ghosts don't have to haunt. Sometimes they just watch as you rebuild. And I finally understood. Living with truth is its own kind of justice. I received the invitation to Mom's memorial in the mail one quiet afternoon. No fanfare, just a pale cream card from my aunt, inviting me to remember our mother among a small gathering. There was no mention of Leander or Dad. I sat with it at my desk, turning it over in my hands. I decided to go. Not with robes, press, or police escort. Just me, quietly showing up. The day of the memorial, I arrived wearing a plain navy blazer and gray trousers. The sun was mild, and the gathering took place under a large oak in the backyard. Familiar faces were there, cousins, aunts, an uncle or two. Some looked genuinely surprised to see me. Their smiles were shy, tinged with regret. I nodded and greeted them softly. There were no speeches set aside for me, no expectations. I made my way to the memorial table, where her photo smiled back in sepia tones, her face still bright, hopeful. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I showed up, Mom. Not for them. For you." I let that be my conversation. I felt weight leave my chest. The morning wasn't about accusation. It was about presence. The hush after was closer to closure than any argument. Word came through my phone. Leander had been formally indicted following the IRS audit. The news spoke of charges, embezzlement, filing false documents, his allies deserting him. No celebratory press from me, no smugness, just quiet acknowledgement. Watching from a distance, I recognized that sometimes truth unspools at its own pace, with silence as its greatest echo. Later that evening, I sat at my dining table, pen in hand, and wrote a letter to my father. I wrote, "You let me die in your eyes, but I lived anyway. I don't need forgiveness, just honesty one day. I hope you can face what we lost." I read it once, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the back of a drawer. Not for someone else, just for me. Days later, I returned to court. After a session ended, a visitor approached, a woman whose name I initially didn't recognize. She hesitated, then spoke. "You helped my mom keep her home years ago. I'll never forget that." I offered a gentle smile, feeling the familiarity yet amazement that legal efforts often rippled through lives in unseen ways. "That's what I do," I said, looking her in the eyes. She nodded, her gratitude clear. That moment made me understand. My strength wasn't in courtroom drama or public vindication. It lay in the quiet acts of integrity, the small kindnesses no one noticed, perhaps even my family. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply breathes. I heard through my legal team that Dad's 70th birthday gala is still happening. It's lavish, media-heavy, a clear legacy showcase. My name? Not invited again. But this time I didn't wince. I felt ready. I prepared quietly in my study late one night, scanning old power of attorney documents signed years ago under subtle family pressure. Early next morning, I filed a final motion in court. Revoke that authority. I attached evidence, typed emails, bank records, quietly documented coercion. I knew it would land like a gentle avalanche. A week later, I sat across from the judge in the courtroom. The ruling came down swiftly. The power of attorney was invalid. Family assets were frozen pending further review. My brothers got caught off guard. Their control stripped quietly, legally. No flash, just a dignified, precise strike. I left with a calm sense of finality. That evening, I saw a feature story by a journalist I'd helped years ago. She had never forgotten. The piece was titled, "The Forgotten Son Who Remembered Justice." It included a private recording of Dad admitting, "I never believed Hadrian would survive law school." That clip ran across public news feeds. Sympathy for me surged. Leander went from polished heir to public pariah. Late that night, I drove to Mom's gravesite, holding a single white rose. The cemetery was still under the moon. I knelt and placed the flower in front of her headstone. I whispered, "I showed them who your son really is." I let the words linger. I felt something shift inside. Vindication, not vengeance. A lighter spirit. The next morning I stood in my courtroom again, presiding over a case for a young girl wrongly removed from her grandmother's care. It was pro bono, just a quiet job of righting a wrong. When proceedings ended, a stranger approached, a woman whose face lit up. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "You gave my granddaughter back her home." I offered a humble nod. "That's what I do. I answered softly. Later, back at my chambers, I looked at the folded judge's robe left from my confrontation at the funeral. I placed it beside a small wooden gavel a former mentor had given me. That gavel? Some justice is served in court, some by surviving, he told me once. I nodded silently. I leaned back and breathed deep. They held a funeral for me. But I never died. I just stopped asking them to see me. In the end, this wasn't a story about revenge. It was about remembrance. About remembering who you are when the world tries to erase you. I stood at the edge of my own funeral and didn't flinch. Not because I'm fearless, but because I finally understood that silence isn't surrender. It's sometimes the sharpest form of resistance. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been told to sit down, shut up, or disappear for the sake of peace, then maybe this story was meant for you. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped crossing ones that only went one way. What I learned through it all is this. Family isn't defined by shared blood. It's defined by shared truth. And sometimes standing alone is the only way to stand tall. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fight to be seen in your own story? Drop a 1 in the comments if this video touched something deep in you. Or tell me where you're watching from. Your town might be quiet, but your voice matters here. And if you didn't like this video, I still want to know why. Let's talk about it. If this story stayed with you, if it gave you strength or just made you think, please hit that subscribe button. There are more stories coming, and maybe one of them is yours.